Melissa Hart never imagined her career would end under fluorescent lights, surrounded by silence. When she first walked into Northbridge Digital, she'd felt proud of the years it took her to climb from junior copywriter to senior campaign strategist. The agency was known for creativity, speed, and loyalty. It wasn't the biggest firm in Seattle, but it was respected. And Melissa, after 10 years of surviving in competitive offices, believed she'd finally found her home. That illusion shattered the day the CEO's son joined the company. Evan Cross arrived on a Monday morning, just before summer. He was tall, charismatic, and the kind of handsome that made people listen before realizing he had nothing to say. His smile was rehearsed, confident, but hollow. He shook hands too firmly and called everyone by their first name, even people twice his age. He was fresh out of business school, Harvard, of course. The CEO, Richard Cross, introduced him as the future of Northbridge. Everyone clapped. Melissa did too, though her palms barely touched. Evan wasn't subtle about who he was. His office was twice the size of anyone else's at his level. A glass wall, state-of-the-art computer, and a view of the skyline that Melissa had dreamed of for years. In the beginning, he pretended to be humble. He asked questions in meetings, complimented everyone's ideas, and promised to learn from the veterans. But within weeks, the mask started to crack. He began revising Melissa's campaign strategies, turning her carefully planned budgets into expensive chaos. When she asked why, he shrugged. "It's marketing, Melissa. You gotta spend money to make money." That would have been fine if the spending made sense, but it didn't. Invoices didn't match services. Vendor costs appeared inflated. When Melissa raised concerns, Evan brushed them off. "It's just aggressive pricing. Big clients like to see that we're investing heavily." The first time he said that, she'd believed him. The second time, she'd written it down. The Solvix campaign was the biggest project Northbridge had ever landed. $1 million digital marketing partnership with a fast-growing software company. Melissa led the project, reporting directly to Evan. She noticed strange expenses in the campaign's ledger, payments to companies she didn't recognize. Names like Blue Peak Consulting and Data Vista Solutions appeared suddenly, without corresponding tasks. When she asked the accounting team, they said those vendors had been approved by management. When she pressed further, they grew quiet. Something was wrong, and Evan knew she sensed it. He began isolating her subtly, removing her from key meetings, reassigning her reports, even rewording her emails before forwarding them to clients. When Melissa confronted him about it, he smiled. "You worry too much," he said. "That's why you'll never be a big-picture thinker. You get stuck in details." It stung, but she let it go, until the morning everything fell apart. It was a Tuesday. The sky was the kind of gray that felt personal. Melissa arrived early for the Solvix quarterly review, coffee in hand, notes perfectly arranged. When she entered the boardroom, Evan was already there, standing at the front, smiling at the CEO, at clients, at everyone. Her slides were on the screen, her data, her creative strategy, her results. He began presenting. At first, she thought he was simply introducing her work. But as he went on, using her words, her graphs, even her phrasing, she realized he was taking credit. Completely. Richard Cross, the CEO, nodded approvingly. The clients smiled. No one knew. No one realized. Melissa felt heat rise in her chest. She waited for her turn to speak, to clarify, gently, professionally, but Evan never gave her one. When the presentation ended, he looked straight at her and said, "Of course, I had an incredible team behind me, but leadership means taking ownership." People clapped. Melissa's throat tightened. She stood up, voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "Actually, I'd like to note that the campaign plan and data were managed by me and my team." Evan turned to her sharply. "Melissa," he said, tone dripping with authority, "let's not get territorial. We're a team, remember." He chuckled, glancing at the CEO as if sharing an inside joke. "Maybe we can talk about individual contributions later, after we discuss your recent performance issues." The room fell silent. Richard Cross frowned slightly, but Evan continued. In fact, let's do that now. Melissa, I've had multiple reports about your communication. I think it's time we reevaluate your position. Her heart pounded. Excuse me. He smiled. You're talented, but disruptive. Maybe a break would help you reflect. The CEO shifted uncomfortably. Evan. But Evan cut him off. It's fine, Dad. It's already handled. And just like that, in front of everyone, she was fired. No HR meeting. No warning, just humiliation. She gathered her laptop slowly, face burning, the room spinning. No one spoke. Not one person. Even the CEO, the man she'd worked for faithfully for years, stayed silent. When she left the room, the only sound was the applause continuing behind her, muffled by the closing door. That night, Melissa sat in her car for hours. The world outside blurred into lights and rain. She thought of every campaign she'd built, every late night she'd stayed, every time she defended that company's name. All of it, erased by a spoiled child who thought he could buy credibility with his father's money. She filed for unemployment. She updated her resume. She pretended to move on. But something wouldn't let her. Something about those fake vendor names, Blue Peak, Data Vista, kept echoing in her head. She'd seen those invoices before, in the Solvix file, the same ones Evan brushed off. And she remembered something else, an email thread. Evan had once forwarded a document to her accidentally. It contained a routing number at the bottom, not a company, but a personal account. She hadn't thought much of it then. Now, she couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 weeks after her firing, Melissa met for coffee with Lydia, a junior accountant from Northbridge who'd always admired her. Lydia looked nervous. I shouldn't even be talking to you, she whispered, but you were right. Melissa frowned. About what? The Solvix numbers. There's a full audit happening right now. Evan's been acting weird, panicking, pulling people into closed-door meetings. Melissa's pulse quickened. What kind of audit? External. CEO ordered it himself after Solvix complained about invoice inconsistencies. Melissa froze. The client had noticed. Lydia leaned closer. They found multiple payments to shell companies. One of them, Blue Peak, traces back to an LLC registered under Evan's name. The cafe noise around them faded. Melissa's mind went silent. Evan had been embezzling funds, and she'd almost exposed him by accident. That's why he fired her so abruptly, to shut her up. Lydia hesitated before adding. Melissa, they're trying to keep it quiet, but it's bad, like felony bad. Melissa sat back, hands trembling slightly. For weeks, she'd been replaying that humiliating meeting, wondering what she'd done wrong. Now she knew. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd simply been the one person who saw too much. That night, Melissa opened her old work laptop, the one she'd backed up before turning it in. Inside, she found the campaign folders, the emails, and most importantly, the invoice records. Every detail lined up, the same fake vendors, the same inflated costs, the same signature at the bottom, Evan Cross. She didn't know what to do yet, whether to go public, go to the CEO, or stay silent. But one thing was certain. If Evan thought firing her would bury the truth, he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning, Melissa woke with a rare calm, the kind that comes after a decision has already been made. For weeks, she'd lived with anger buzzing inside her like a broken wire. But now that anger had purpose. She wasn't going to destroy Evan out of spite. She was going to expose him, publicly, cleanly, completely. Melissa began by printing every document from her old backups, email threads, invoices, Slack screenshots, even calendar invites. She color-coded everything by campaign, blue for Solvix, red for Braven Logistics, green for Skynova. The same fake vendors appeared across all three. Each had the same mailing address, a small office suite registered under Crosspoint Consulting, LLC. She almost laughed when she saw the name, Crosspoint Cross, as in Evan Cross. It was lazy, arrogant, exactly what she expected from a man who thought he was untouchable. Melissa wasn't a hacker or a detective, but she was detail-obsessed, the very trait Evan had mocked her for, and that attention to detail was about to end his career. Meanwhile, inside Northbridge Digital, things were unraveling. Evan's charm had worn off. The staff whispered in corners, clients asked quiet questions, and the CEO, Richard Cross, had grown distant. He ordered an external audit after Solvix threatened to pull out of their contract. At first, he defended his son, but the auditors kept asking uncomfortable questions. When Richard demanded access to Evan's vendor records, Evan stalled. "Dad, I've got it under control." "That's not an answer, Evan. It's just accounting noise. You wouldn't understand." The old man had built his company from scratch, late nights, long flights, endless negotiations. To see his son treating it like a playground burned deeper than he admitted. But love blinded him, until the day he saw a number he couldn't ignore. It was a single invoice, $87,000, billed by Blue Peak Consulting for market analytics. When Richard asked accounting for the deliverables, no one could produce a report. No contract, no contact person, no data, nothing. He stared at the invoice for a long time, then at the signature at the bottom, Evan's digital stamp. The next morning, he called his son into his office. "Evan," he said slowly, "what's Blue Peak Consulting?" Evan's face didn't flicker. "A vendor we used for data work." "Who runs it?" "A third-party analytics firm, Seattle-based." Richard typed the name quietly into his laptop. A business registration appeared, one he hadn't expected to see. Owner, Evan Cross, address, P.O. Box 9235, Bellevue. He sat back, feeling a cold weight settle in his stomach. "You've got 5 minutes," he said. "Tell me everything." Evan's voice cracked for the first time in his life. "Dad, it's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. News spread fast. By Thursday, half the office knew an investigation was underway. Evan stopped walking through the open floor. He stayed behind glass walls, barking orders over Slack, his charm replaced by panic. That's when Melissa made her move. She emailed a single message to Richard Cross, subject line: "Audit support, information regarding campaign transactions." No greeting, no emotion, just facts. Attached were 27 pages of documentation, every false invoice, every inflated charge, every thread showing Evan's manipulation. At the end of the email, one line stood alone. "You may fire people to silence them, but the numbers always speak." She hit send, then closed her laptop. Her heart raced, her hands shook, but she felt something she hadn't felt in months: peace. The next afternoon, Richard called an emergency executive meeting. Melissa wasn't there, of course. She hadn't worked there for weeks, but her name came up more than anyone's. Richard entered the boardroom looking decades older. Evan sat across from him, pale and tight-lipped. The external auditors joined via video call, their tone icy. They laid out the findings one by one. Over $420,000 in misallocated funds. 3 shell companies tied to Evan's social security number. Unauthorized bonus transfers to a consulting retainer account. When they finished, silence filled the room. Richard stared at his son, then at the screen. "Is there any world," he said quietly, "in which this isn't theft?" Evan swallowed hard. "Dad, I can fix it, we can." "We," Richard's voice rose. "We. You dragged my company into felony territory. You fired a woman who tried to stop you." Evan's mask cracked. "She was trying to ruin me." "She was doing her job." The board members looked away. Some were recording, subtly. The CEO's voice trembled with fury, not just at his son, but at himself for protecting him. "You humiliated her in front of clients, Evan. You cost us trust, reputation, everything I built. You're done here." Evan's face twisted. "You can't fire your own son." Richard's reply was calm and final. "Watch me." By Monday morning, the story hit the press. Someone, no one ever confirmed who, leaked the audit findings to a Seattle business blog. Headline: CEO's son accused of embezzlement from within Northbridge Digital. Within hours, it spread everywhere: LinkedIn, Reddit, marketing news outlets. And buried halfway down the article was a single paragraph. Sources indicate that the whistleblower was a former employee wrongfully terminated during a campaign presentation last quarter. Internal reports confirm she provided the evidence that led to the audit. They didn't name her, but everyone knew. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from old coworkers, former clients, even competitors offering her jobs. Lydia texted, "He's gone. They escorted him out this morning. I wish you could have seen his face." Melissa didn't need to. She could imagine it perfectly. 2 days later, her doorbell rang. When she opened it, Richard Cross stood there, suit crisp, eyes weary. He held an envelope. "Melissa," he said quietly, "may I come in?" She hesitated. The last time she saw him, he'd said nothing while she was humiliated. Still, she stepped aside. He sat at her kitchen table, like a man who'd lost everything. "I owe you an apology," he began, "and not just for what my son did, but for what I didn't do." She said nothing. He continued, "You tried to warn us. You were loyal, and I failed you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want to make things right." He slid the envelope toward her. Inside was a check, 6 months' salary, plus severance she'd never received, and another sheet, a formal letter of reinstatement, plus a public statement drafted for her approval. Melissa looked at it for a long time. "You don't have to do this," she said finally. "Yes, I do," Richard replied, "because if I don't, I become him." For the first time, his voice broke. "I raised a man who thought image mattered more than integrity. Maybe that started with me. I can't undo it, but I can fix this part." That night, Melissa read through everything. The statement cleared her name, publicly acknowledging her as the whistleblower who protected the company from financial collapse. It offered her reinstatement as senior strategy director and an open apology signed by the CEO himself. But she didn't want to go back. Northbridge Digital had been her dream once, but not anymore. It was a battlefield, and she was done fighting. So instead, she wrote her own response. "Mr. Cross, I accept your apology but decline the reinstatement. I'm moving forward. I don't need to return to prove what I already know, that truth always wins eventually." She signed it simply, Melissa Hart. Then she closed her laptop and stepped outside, letting the night air wash over her. For the first time in months, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel humiliated. She felt powerful. Because revenge wasn't always about destroying someone. Sometimes, it was about reclaiming yourself piece by piece, truth by truth. It started small, a quiet mention in the Seattle Herald. Then, within days, it spread across the business world. Northbridge Digital's former VP under federal investigation for fraud. CEO's son faces charges in $400K embezzlement scandal. Every major marketing outlet picked it up. Comment sections lit up with outrage, not just at Evan, but at the culture that let him rise so fast, unchecked. Then came the video. A recording leaked from that fateful meeting, the day Evan had fired Melissa in front of everyone. Someone had captured it on their phone. It showed Evan belittling her, interrupting her, smirking while the room went silent. And then, as the clip went viral, another version surfaced, this time side by side with news of the audit. The caption read, "He fired her to hide his crimes. She exposed him anyway." In less than 24 hours, it hit 1 million views. People commented things like, "She's a legend, the calmest revenge ever. This is why you don't underestimate quiet people." Melissa didn't share it. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any statement. Evan Cross's world collapsed quickly. The auditors handed their report to federal investigators. Within a month, he faced charges for wire fraud, falsifying business records, and misuse of company funds. His assets were frozen. His friends stopped returning calls. Even the family lawyers couldn't shield him from the headlines. The once confident heir who strutted through glass offices now appeared in court in a wrinkled gray suit, eyes hollow. Reporters shouted questions as he walked past. "Mr. Cross, any comment on the charges? Do you regret firing Melissa Hart?" He didn't answer. The video of his humiliation played again and again online, him mocking her, dismissing her, calling her disruptive. Now the word took on new meaning. She had disrupted him completely. While Evan's empire crumbled, Melissa built her own. After the story broke, she received dozens of offers, not out of pity, but respect. Companies wanted the woman who caught what no one else did. Podcasts wanted her story. Universities invited her to speak about ethics in leadership. But she didn't take any of those immediately. Instead, she founded Heart and Edge Consulting, a small digital strategy firm dedicated to transparency and creative integrity. Her motto: "We grow brands without losing our soul." Within a year, she signed Solvix, the same client that had witnessed her public firing. When they walked into her new office, the CEO smiled. "Feels good to be back with the right person in charge." She returned the smile. "This time, we'll do things right." The campaign that followed broke records. Her firm tripled in size within months, powered by clients who valued honesty as much as innovation. One rainy evening, Melissa sat across from a local journalist who'd been following the story since the start. The camera lights glowed softly, her reflection mirrored in the glass window behind them. "So," the journalist asked, "do you consider what happened to be revenge?" Melissa smiled faintly. "No," she said. "Revenge implies I wanted to hurt him. I didn't. I just wanted the truth to exist publicly where lies can't breathe." "Still," the journalist pressed, "watching him face consequences must have felt satisfying." Melissa paused, her expression thoughtful. "You know what was satisfying? Knowing I didn't have to destroy him. He did it himself." That quote would headline the interview later. He did it himself. It spread again, a quiet anthem for anyone who'd ever been wronged and forced to stay silent. Meanwhile, Richard Cross resigned as CEO of Northbridge Digital. He handed leadership to a new board, promising a company culture built on ethics rather than inheritance. But before stepping down, he requested one final meeting with Melissa. They met in a quiet cafe, far from the offices that had once defined their lives. "You were right about everything," he said, "and I was a coward not to defend you." Melissa looked at him for a long moment. "You were a father," she replied gently, "and sometimes that blinds us, but you fixed it, that matters." He exhaled slowly, as though finally letting go of years of guilt. "What are you going to do next?" "Build something honest," she said simply, "something that lasts." By spring, Melissa's name was everywhere: Forbes, Business Insider, even Fast Company. Not because she'd exposed corruption, but because of what she'd built afterward. Heart and Edge became a symbol of ethical rebirth in a world addicted to shortcuts. Her clients described her as fearless but kind. Her employees called her the woman who rewrote the rules. Every time she passed a glass office building, she remembered that conference room, the humiliation, the silence, the applause that had followed her firing, and she smiled. Because that room had once been her downfall, now it was her origin story. When Evan's sentencing day finally arrived, Melissa didn't attend. But she watched the coverage quietly from her office. He stood before the judge, pale, trembling, smaller than she'd ever seen him. The prosecutor's words echoed through the broadcast. Mr. Cross abused his power, his position, and his privilege, but he underestimated the one thing that money can't erase: accountability. Evan was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison and ordered to repay the embezzled funds. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, microphones flashing. Someone shouted, "Evan, any message for Melissa Hart?" He paused for a heartbeat, then lowered his eyes and said nothing. A few weeks later, Melissa received a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a short note written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "I used to think I was smarter than everyone. You showed me I was just scared. I'm sorry for everything. EC. Melissa stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. She didn't forgive him, but she acknowledged it, a final echo of a man she'd already left behind. On the 1-year anniversary of her firing, Melissa hosted an event at her firm, a small networking night for women in digital marketing. The walls glowed with soft light, the air buzzing with laughter and music. During her closing speech, she looked out at the faces of young professionals, some of whom had followed her story from the start. "A year ago," she began, "I thought my career was over. I thought silence was safer than truth. But I learned something powerful. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do to a bully is survive them." The room went still, then applause loud, proud, defiant. Later that night, as she walked to her car, Seattle's skyline shimmered in the distance, the same view she once admired from behind glass walls. Now she didn't need those walls, she built her own view. Melissa unlocked her car, glanced once more at the stars peeking through the clouds, and smiled. "He fired me publicly," she whispered, "but the truth fired him permanently." She started the engine and drove away, leaving behind not just a company, but a chapter she'd outgrown. And in that quiet, the story ended, not with revenge, but with victory earned the hard way, through courage, integrity, and the unshakable belief that the truth always comes back.